Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Snehal Antani. Snehal, thanks for being back on the show, man.
Yeah, I feel like I need your autograph, man. You're a cybersecurity celebrity now.
That's funny because I'm having you on here because you've been sharing some amazing insights about, the success of the company first, which I'll talk to you about in a bit on the business side, but also, the autonomous pen testing side, the AI intersection with offensive security and all those type of things. But for folks that don't know you, haven't caught a previous episode, don't follow you online, tell us about yourself as well as the team at Horizon 3.
Yeah, so my background, I was a engineer by education and trade, did my undergrad at Purdue, and then I started my career at IBM in the middleware world and mainframes. It was pretty interesting to be there because I learned pretty quickly the difference between those that say cloud and those that say mainframe is the year they were born. And so I got to learn quite a bit about kind of enterprise technology stack, hardware, middleware, apps, security, so on. And I was the CIO at GE Capital and then moved out west to be the CTO at Splunk. And the fun part of the career, I think, is leaving industry at the end of 17 and becoming the first chief technology officer for JSOC, or Joint Special Operations Command. And it was the hardest, most meaningful work of my career, to leave industry and work alongside, the greatest leaders the world will never know of, and being able to just view this almost like a PhD program in leadership, getting to work on problems that truly mattered. And that's where I met my co-founder and early team. And when they retired from the Air Force, the Army, and elsewhere, and I finished my time at JSOC, we started Horizon 3 together.
Yeah. So what does Horizon 3 do? And also, I want to ask you a question about that because I know you did a talk recently, if I'm not mistaken, with some folks around the defense industrial base and things like that. So it seems like it's almost come full circle for you in terms of your career.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So with Horizon 3, it's all about proactive security and cyber resilience. When I was a CIO, I had no idea I was secure until the bad guys showed up. Are we fixing the right vulnerabilities? Are we logging the right data in Splunk? Is my EDR actually working properly? And the answer is I don't know. I wait to get hacked. I hire a pen test consultant to show up once a year. But for every patch Tuesday, I wanted a pen test Wednesday. I didn't want to just pen test a small slice of my environment. I wanted to pen test the whole thing as often as possible. And it just wasn't feasible. And the question was, could we invent a force multiplier, an AI hacker of sorts that could comprehensively pen test my entire enterprise and hack myself as often as possible? And that's what we set out to build. It was a huge leap of faith. It was before people thought it was possible. And here we are 5 years later. I've got 4,400 companies globally using Horizon 3. We're growing at almost 140% year over year in revenue at this size and scale, which is remarkable. A third of my people are former NSA, CIA, special operations types. 2/3 are nerds and skinny jeans that know how to build, ship, and sell software. And our company culture, in addition to our products and partners, are a huge advantage that we've cultivated over time.
Yeah, you've built a hell of a team. And I personally, like on my side, when I'm, curating content, just keeping up with the industry, I'm often seeing what are you guys kind of seeing out there in the real world? And, what's the state of the art? Because you guys are kind of you're cutting edge. You're there with those companies that are doing that. Before we dive too deep in the weeds of all these kind of things and insights you're seeing at a high level, like when you look at the ecosystem here, your real world experience with Horizon 3 and so on, like what's the state of autonomous pen testing, the impact of AI, agents, LLMs, when we think about offensive security? Because, we hear everything from, we're never going to need another pen tester again. It's all going to be automated. The career field is never going to be the same to, it's all, snake oil. None of it works. It's just, hype. So what are you seeing? Like, what's your kind of read of the ecosystem?
Yeah, let's talk about it in three perspectives. The first one is, what's the role of the human in this world of pen testing? And by the way, the role of the human for pen testing is analogous to what we're seeing in software engineering, what we're seeing in law, and the role of AI in each of those industries. Where in software engineering, it's a great metaphor. I think those that got boot camp certificates in front end development are having the hardest time finding a job right now because coding co-pilots are just better at writing that kind of code. And there's a huge demand for senior software engineers that not only know how to write complicated code, but they understand how to review and troubleshoot other people's code. A senior software engineer is an expert at troubleshooting other people's code. That's one of the criteria in any software career path. And so the similar thing in pen testing, I think that humans are uniquely gifted at finding logic flaws in custom code, and they're uniquely gifted at the long tail of OT, ICS, and other bespoke systems, and basically things that'll put them on stage at DEF CON. Just take that as a litmus test. Whereas algorithms or AI hackers will be far superior at network penetration testing at scale, especially as you do it right against production systems, which is actually a very hard problem. And so I think that entry-level pen testers are going to have a really hard time unless they're able to become experts really quickly, or especially specialize in niche areas. So I'll pause there. Does that kind of first part make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I was actually going to ask you that, a follow-up question, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, is like, what impact, when you look at AI agents, LLMs, et cetera, do you think they're going to have both on pen testing as a kind of a career field or practice, and then also as a product and or service? Because as you talked about, you wish you had, kind of continuous pen testing activities. And it's always been cyclical, annual type stuff, kind of check the box that we did it this year. We'll do it again next year. And in compliance, honestly, has been the same way. And I'm seeing, not to take us in a sidetrack, but like we look at GRC engineering and compliance is kind of going down this path of more real-time telemetry insights and so on as well. What do you see changing in terms of as we move forward, both as a practice from a practitioner's perspective and also as a product or service?
Yeah, I would say go back to first principles for a moment. The goal of a pen test is not to find problems. It is to quickly fix problems that matter. And if you take that as a first principle, what I think is going to happen, it's happening already, and we're leading the way, is pen testing and SOAR are quickly converging into a set of integrated workflows around remediation. So you run a pen test, you understand where you're exploitable, you understand whether you need to patch something, fix a misconfiguration, put in a compensating control, roll a credential password or whatever, and you're going to take some sort of action. Now, a bunch of those actions are actually safe to automatically run against production. A bunch of those actions are not safe to automatically run against production and require some human in the loop, or at least on the loop. And so I think everything's about automated remediation. Remediation is the bottleneck now that finding exploitable issues has been solved through autonomous pen testing.
I love what you said there, by the way, because I feel like in the broader context of vulnerability management and, even shift left, you could say like the focus for quite a while was like on finding problems, and we got really good at finding problems, but we did not get good at fixing problems. And as you said, remediation is the bottleneck. And if we're just getting good at finding problems and dumping them on people and never fixing them, we're not remediating any risk. We're not improving the organization's resiliency. We're not really kind of making any progress in that context.
Yeah, and building on that, I mean, Pat Garrity does amazing. My two favorite LinkedIn followers are you and Garrity, and what's really fun is some of the data around CISO kevs. So was it 80? I think Verizon DBIR said 85% of CISO kevs are still exploitable 30 days after notification. Once again, the bottleneck is remediation, and that's if they even know they've got the kev. And so, what do we do to accelerate that? I think the other part in here is this idea of continuous. So continuous is almost a maturity curve. You first start with incomplete snapshot, and that's where everyone is today of a pen test. 5% of their network may be in scope. The first thing you move towards is comprehensive snapshot. You want to run a full pen test against all 10,000 IPs in your network as one integrated system, because that's how the attackers view you. They don't care about your boundaries between business units or clouds or whatever else. It's all one interconnected system. So if it's network reachable or inadvertently network reachable, you need to view that as one cohesive scope. After that, it's, all right, I just ran a comprehensive pen test last quarter. Let me rerun it and do a diff and see how many new problems did we find and why? How many problems did we fix? Great. How many problems did we fix but are now exploitable again? Well, what's going on there, right? The reoccurrence rate. And then as you build your maturity in remediation, you start to move from quarterly diffs to monthly diffs from different points of view. Like, what if the attacker gains initial access in my DMZ? What damage can they do? What if they gain initial access from the user zone or the data zone? What damage can they do from that perspective? And then you understand the diffs, every month, every week from different points of view in your environment. And that's where you start to get into things like threat-informed perspectives and using that to manage the blast radius of a compromise. Because really, if you assume breach, the attacker is going to get in. We're in the blast radius management business in terms of cybersecurity. And we just have to accept that and operationalize the process of identifying and reducing your blast radius.
Yeah, that phrase you use there, threat-informed defense, is something I've heard you and the team talking about recently. And to me, as I looked at that, it kind of feels like, you've taken threat modeling, which is, many consider, hypothetical, theoretical type of exercise. Like we're kind of thinking about the system and what can go wrong and things like that. But you're taking that and putting it into practice and really simulating, okay, here's what can happen. Here's how it could happen. Here's how you can go about mitigating it against that. Tell us a bit more about the threat-informed defense and how you see organizations implementing that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to another first principle or just reality, which is risk-based vulnerability management is awful and just a failed endeavor. And when I was a CIO at GE Capital, when I was at DoD, I was the largest customer in the world for the largest vuln management products. And the hardest part of my job was deciding what not to fix. I get 100,000 vulnerabilities, maybe 5 or 10 of them are actually exploitable. And I'll get a list of CVEs, and I never knew the consequence of exploitation. Because how am I going to prioritize something if I don't understand the consequence of it? Just because I've got the log4j jar file that's vulnerable to log4shell doesn't mean it's exploitable in my environment. I could have put an egress filter that prevents RMI outbound connections and prevented the exploitation of log4shell. And I could have gone home early instead of adhering to fixing a bunch of jar files that I knew weren't exploitable. So when you think about risk in risk-based vuln management, I think about it in 3 ways. The first is this issue actually exploitable? It's a very simple yes or no. But the way to find that out is you actually have to try to exploit it with all of your defense and depth layers turned on. The next is, are there threat actors known to be abusing this? Because if there's threat actor pressure, I'm going to think about it differently. If this is an issue known to be exploited by Salt Typhoon, I'm going to treat that differently. And then finally, what is the precise business impact of exploitation? What is the consequence of this happening? Don't just tell me ransomware risk. Like that's way too generic. And we've kind of become numb to it as executives. Tell me that the attacker can compromise accounts receivables credentials and interdict financial accounts receivable payments and steal a bunch of money. Okay, now I've got it. How much money is at risk? Well, if I'm a mortgage company, that's a really big deal. If I am a dentist office, I don't take a lot of payments through email and accounts receivable. Okay, maybe not as big a deal. But understanding the precise consequence is the final leg of how to determine prioritization of an issue.
Yeah, I feel like that piece is often missing from the conversation in risk management, vulnerability management, et cetera. Like we often talk about criticality, severity, even reachability and exploitability has kind of become more of a common topic, but impact is much more nuanced and it's organizational specific, as you said, based on compensating controls and the environmental context and things like that. And I feel like that piece is often not discussed. And I wanted to ask you this as well. You made a post recently talking about a large scale endeavor you guys did. I think it was tens of thousands of assets involved, right? You might have said 14,000. I forget the exact number, but you said, and the reason I bring this up is that you said no CVEs. It was misconfigurations, weak passwords, poor hygiene. I feel like we've kind of hyper focused on CVEs and vulnerabilities, but what about, just hygiene and posture and, configurations and so on? Like, I feel like that's missing from the conversation a lot of times as well.
Yeah, I feel we've and I lived in this role and I saw it and I was guilty of it myself at the time also. I feel we've over-rotated on CVEs and patching. And it's a bit counterintuitive, but our immediate default answer or program as a CIO or CISO is patch as quickly as you can. Well, there's a ton of problems that have no effect on patching. It's a misconfiguration or a bad credential policy or something else. Number 2 is there are a number of other compensating controls you could put in place or defense and depth layers to prevent exploitation that outside of the patch window or the maintenance window. And so you have multiple options, but the easy button and almost like the cop out is I've got to wait for the patching window. CVEs are the same thing. Well, I've got CVEs. I don't even have time to think about credential attacks. Like, dude, attackers don't hack in with CVEs like you see in the movies. They log in with credentials that they've pilfered because you're based in Atlanta and your password is 28-3 WTF. I'm a Patriots fan, so I try to work that in everywhere I can. And it's just, it's crazy to think about that. So the story in the blog post I wrote the other day was we're running a pen test and this environment had 14,000 assets or hosts in it. And they had Windows Defender, really good product when you have it configured correctly. Well, out of the 14,000, 14 endpoint agents or Defender agents were not configured correctly. They either weren't updated, they didn't have the right configurations enabled, they were in observe mode only versus block mode, whatever it might be. Of those 14 misconfigured EDR agents, one of them allowed Node 0 to dump credentials, pilfer domain admin, and then chain together a sequence of events, or domain user, and chain together a sequence of events to become full domain admin in the network. And so 14,000 endpoints, I'm sure that this company thought they were doing really well. They didn't realize that all it takes is one misconfigured EDR agent to get full domain admin, which gives the attackers keys to the kingdom. Now, do I have to go patch something for that? No. Is there a CVE for that? No. It's fix the defender configuration on that one host. And so knowing what to fix and precisely, taking action, I think is the key bottleneck here.
Yeah, at the risk of opening up a can of worms, I want to ask you something as well. You mentioned that you've been a technology executive for enterprise organizations. Now you're on the other side of that, kind of testing and prodding and poking and evaluate security postures. I've been kind of making an argument to some extent, and you guys probably see this based on exploitation trends and vulnerability trends and so on, that security tools are part of your attack surface. Now, are they part of it? They're a very enticing part of it because they often have elevated permissions, sensitive data. They have information about vulnerabilities and weaknesses and so on across the environment. They have really powerful credentials associated with them, et cetera. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I see a lot of times organizations have tens and even hundreds of security tools not configured, not tuned, not implemented, not optimized, and it could be used against you in a lot of cases. So I'm curious your thoughts on that when you go in and evaluate environments.
Yeah. So look, I was at DoD when SolarWinds went down, and we had to go off and deal with that. I would generalize it more to there's a class of software with extremely well-placed access and often used by people of significant privilege, right? Admins or so on. HPILO, Dell iDRAC, Veeam Backup and Recovery, SolarWinds, observability tools, security tools, Splunk as an example or whatever. And attackers know this. And they know you're going to patch your Splunk environment less frequency than maybe your Windows environment, because sometimes it's not even part of your Patch Tuesday mantra because it's very endpoint heavy. HPILO, people don't patch that software very often, and it's out of band, systems management software only accessed by privileged users. Veeam Backup and Recovery has been the initial compromise point for many of Node Zero's domain compromises because it's unpatched, it's easy to overlook, it's accessed by people of privilege, it stores credentials in clear text in memory. So if you get code execution, you can do a whole bunch of damage. And so I think in general, we need to really think about two things. Why does that software require such significant placement and access? Number one. And number two is, three things. Why are we tolerating these products that run on custom operating systems that can't be instrumented? You actually can't deploy an EDR agent on a bunch of these kinds of virtual appliances. So they're blind spots in the network, right? And then the third part is, how do we make sure that we've got the right hardening discipline? Or actually, even before that, why do these things require persistent agents? I get frustrated when I have to buy a security product or any product that has yet another credentialed agent deployed on every host. It's just absolutely insane. That's an attack surface. SolarWinds was this way and so on. So I think architecturally, products that are ephemeral by design, no persistent agents by design, minimal credential access, can be observed and instrumented. These are things that are crucial in the design of future products for the enterprise.
Yeah, that's that whole little diatribe I guess you just gave there is something that all security and technology leaders, as you said, need to think about. Not even just security tools. You put it very well. It's not just security tools. It's observability, it's governance, it's all these types of IT ops types tools that have these accesses and these permissions and these things that people need to be thinking about, because it can end up hurting you quite severely, as we've seen several times now. I was going to ask you as well. You've talked about how the team is using agents and AI and LLMs and so on to some extent. And of course, malicious actors are looking to use these things as well. I'm curious, as you're using this on the offensive security side, trying to help organizations be more secure, like, what do you think is going to help determine, if the defenders get the asymmetric advantage with this, or if the attackers do? Because I know it's kind of a race that we're both looking to use this technology.
Oh yeah, for sure. Actually, it's a really good deep dive. Before that though, one more point. What I've found is desktop applications are a massive attack surface no one's paying attention to. So I'll give you one last example. If I'm able to get code execution on a host because the EDR failed to do its job, which by the way happens quite a bit. In the last data crunching I did, Sentinel-1 agents, 40% of those EDR agents are misconfigured across our customer base. 40%. It's a great product if you configure it correctly. Now, what happens if I get code execution on an endpoint and I've got the Slack desktop application running on that endpoint? You've got MFA in place, you're post MFA. If I get code execution and the EDR doesn't stop me, our remote access tool can pull the auth token out of memory from the Slack desktop app and gain access to the Slack workspace, where I can gain access to all data accessible, all chats accessible by that user. I can laterally phish, I can pilfer, so on. The same thing is true with Microsoft 365. If I've got 365 running, I can pull the auth token from Teams and compromise your Azure tenant, so on and so forth. And so I think that desktop applications post MFA are storing the auth token in memory. And there's actually nothing you can do on the endpoint to prevent that token extraction outside of making sure the EDR does its job, which is shocking. I didn't even realize that until we started pilfering Slack workspaces automatically. And it was amazing to see that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny real quick on that note is like, people might think, well, it's just Slack. And it's like, well, think of all the things that get shared, stored, communicated via Slack. It could be things you don't want getting out from executive communications, sensitive credentials, you name it. Yes, that is very scary.
Yeah, for sure. Now, your other question, so the first part was world of the human. The second part was actually what we just talked about, which is what's happening in the world of AI hackers or what are the outcomes that pen testing brings to the table. The third one is just this. What are the attackers doing? And also, honestly, what's the research community doing? So what's interesting with the attackers is two things got announced in the last 30 days or so. The first one was Anthropic's research on how a single ransomware operator was able to spin up a bunch of agents and abuse and bypass Anthropic or Claude safety mechanisms and run a ransomware campaign as a team of 5 to 10 people. And when you double click on how that person did it, the hilarious part was that attacker used Claude and prompts to help figure out how to price the ransom, which is pretty awesome.
Looking up their financial data, looking up the company's performance. It was insane to read through and see how innovative they got with that.
Oh, it's incredible. And the one thing is this, as annoying as the bad guys can be, you have to respect their conviction and commitment to master their craft. That's what they are, obsessed with being experts at what they do. Now, the way they bypass the Claude controls or safety mechanisms was extreme compartmentalization. If you execute 5 or 6 commands together, it triggers the malicious alert. If you break that up into 5 individual agents only doing one command, it is below the threshold. And so extreme compartmentalization, think of it as what you see in spy movies, need to know. I don't know what the other spy is doing because it's a need to know basis. If you design your agents to be need to know, it's almost impossible actually for Claude and others to prevent abuse because you're just dividing the task to get below the safety threshold. So what that demonstrated was force multiplication, right? A single person operates like a much larger team because that person's augmented with agents. The second big announcement was Villager, right? It started as a capture the flag tool. It was basically an MCP server front-ending Kali Linux. It then got taken over and extended significantly, where it has evasion by design, plugins for a variety of implants and keystroke logging and so on. And was it 4,200 prompts, system prompts and other prompts to help do data pilfering and things like that. And it's become a really good tool distributed through PyPy that's probably now at 20, 25,000 downloads. It was 11,000 downloads a month ago, probably much more than that. And what that does is accelerate or also lowers the barrier of entry. So the bad guys are catching up. And in the research community, they've also been working this. But if you look at Incalmo and all these other research projects, the two hardest parts of AI pen testing are, number one, cross-host memory. We solved that very early because this is a graph analytics problem. So when we run a pen test against 100,000 hosts, I've got a knowledge graph with 1 billion nodes and edges in it. And that is my cross-host memory. And I'm able to query that knowledge graph and build prompts into LLMs that are 20 to 200 pages long that are highly contextualized and directive to ask very narrow reasoning problems. LLMs are generally stupid. I equate them to teenage drivers. if at any given moment the driver is going to look at their phone and veer off the road, like LLMs are the same way. If you give an LLM an open-ended question, it's going to go all over the place and you got to restart. But if you give an LLM a highly precise prompt with a very narrow reasoning question, like what is the business value of this file, given everything I know about this file, it's actually really good. So we do structured reasoning or precision prompting as part of our product. Everyone else, when you look at, even I'm pretty critical of Expo's architecture and other people's architectures, they're basically using LLM prompts to brute force a command. And it takes you 80 iterations to get to a command that actually works. And your prompt history is your database. That's just not how it works. And the big difference is I'm production safe because you balance discrete commands with exploration, with graph and LLMs and so on. And so I can pen test a production hospital network. Whereas iterative trial and error, where you're throwing stuff up on the wall to see what sticks, is not production safe. And I think that's the big X factor. Autonomous AI hackers for production systems is an insanely hard engineering problem. AI hackers that solve a hack the box range or a pre-production web app, it's not that hard. It's pretty straightforward to go off and do.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about some competitive differentiators here in a moment, which I know you have some strong thoughts on. But I was telling you a bit off air. I was looking into some of your guys' performance. You had like the first half of 2025 announcement. You cited some of these figures a moment ago too. I think it was like 137% year-over-year ARR growth, 400+% growth among the enterprise. I'm curious, like both, because you share a lot of great business insights. I like to follow you on LinkedIn for that. I like to hear from the executives that are out in the field building and doing the thing. I'm curious from your perspective, is it a combination, and I'm sure it is, but of the team you're building, how you guys are executing, but also maybe on the market side, where to your point, like people are asking, I need a Wednesday, post patch Tuesday, continuous monitoring or continuous evaluation, pen test type tool. Like, do you see a shift in the market that's helping drive that surge of growth as well?
Yeah. So I think there's three aspects to it. The first one is there is definitely a shift in the market on the importance of frequent testing, high frequency testing, and then continuous testing. And that shift is both the need to build proactive security programs, the need to do so because of compliance requirements like DORA, NIS2, and whatever, and the fact that it's cheaper to fix problems left of boom than at boom or post boom. And so we see this big shift from that standpoint. The other part is when you think about go to market and you scale a company, my framework is what budget dollars am I targeting? What stories must we tell to take those dollars? And what aha moments in the product experience are needed to make my user a radical champion to get us through the procurement process? And Godfrey Sullivan, who was the Splunk CEO that I used to work for, used to say, your product experience must be so amazing, your user needs a cigarette at the end. A little old school and so on. But the point was, you've got to build that amazing experience. And so when you're scaling a company and you move from hiring a bunch of pirates that are sales reps, individuals that don't care about process, they just run with scissors, to building a Navy that's operating at scale with efficiency, you have to be very crisp on the budget you're targeting, the stories you're telling, and the process of closing a deal. And that's how we're able to sustain excellence. My CRO, Matt Hartley, who happens to be a former Navy guy, is the best CRO I've worked with because he knows how to turn pirates into a Navy, and he doesn't need an SE to demo. So when your CRO can demo the product, the sales reps you hire are not closing deals one steak dinner at a time. They're closing deals because they also are passionate about the space and they're technically credible and so on and so forth. I'll pause there, and then I have a lot of thoughts on what it takes to build an iconic company in general that I use as a framework. But does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And actually makes me think of a different post. Again, this is kind of telling that I follow you, and your post is like you had made a post a bit back about, it was almost like systems of systems thinking, but in the context of the business, right? And it made me think of it, from the engineering side, like we always think of from security, like complex systems and different pieces and parts and how they work together to make a whole, right? And it seems like you kind of approached, as you've scaled, you've approached growing and managing and governing the business from that same perspective of not just thinking of any individual function or unit or so on, but, a system of systems. Is that kind of a good way to frame it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'll take a step back and talk about JSOC for a moment. And in general, JSOC's like Bruno. You don't talk about it. I only talk about the context of leadership and leadership lessons that I learned. And what makes JSOC such a high performing organization is three things I feel. The first is the culture and leadership is about empowering those closest to the problem to get the job done because they have the most context. The second thing is ensuring you've got shared understanding across the entire organization. If Intel knows something that ops doesn't know and you go to mission, something bad could happen. There's no excuse for that data cartel or information cartel. Everyone should know what's going on. So there's this concept of like just shared understanding across the entire organization. And the third part is cadence. You want to have a cadence that drives accountability, that maximizes for understanding. And as you improve understanding, you create a bias for action. So it's all about how you run the heartbeat of the organization. And so those three principles kind of underlie everything that we operate within at Horizon 3. And when I think about system of systems, it's if I wanted to go 5x my marketing budget, cool. Well, I could go burn a bunch of coin putting up, banners at airports or whatever. Do I have the inside sales capacity to deal with the inbound leads, that the influx of that? Do I have enough sales leaders? Do I have enough SEs? Do I have enough customer success folks? Do I have enough revenue operations capacity to actually process the transaction? You've got to think about the outcome as a cross-functional workflow. And you've got to identify the bottlenecks across that cross-functional workflow. And the sooner you do that, sometimes you're going to accept risk. Early on, you accept risk in like revenue operations or whatnot. And but as you scale the company, you start pressure testing different workflows, and you treat these as cross-functional systems.
I'm smirking and laughing because it reminds me so much of the technical conversation we had in the beginning about testing parts of the system and seeing the resilience and how it all functions. Like you're speaking now about a business, but it's the same kind of concept, just in a different context.
Yeah. And then if you think about what does it take to build an iconic company? And when I first started Horizon 3, I looked back at the companies I admired, right? I deeply admired Splunk, and I was privileged to be the CTO there, and several other companies. You look at what George did at CrowdStrike and so on. And there are four things that make a company iconic, I feel. The first one is that outstanding product experience. You have to have aha moments designed in the UX. The second thing is you've got to cultivate a data advantage over time. And when you think about that data advantage, how do you view part of your product as a sensor? And as you use that sensor to collect information, how do you compound value by making your core product smarter? And how do you use that to capture adjacent opportunities? So at Horizon 3, I'm not a pen testing company. I'm a data company. Pen testing is just a sensor that's collecting information I can use to improve my core product and capture adjacent budget. So how do you compound or get smarter over time? The third one that everyone misses is distribution advantage. You're not going to close deals one steak dinner at a time. You close deals by cultivating resellers, MSSPs, and other two-tier distributors. You've got to build a product that has a revenue stream of value that attracts these resellers. So take GuidePoint is a reseller or partner we work with. And it's not about selling pen testing, but when we sell an assessment, the GuidePoint rep or the Optiv rep or whomever can use our results to drag more EDR, more PAM, more data DSPM, more whatever, because we complement all the incumbent products. And so suddenly you're able to motivate distributors to work with you. And the final part is community advantage, where how do you cultivate radical champions that advocate for you? Splunk perfected this. There were people in Fez caps, capes, and Splunk tattoos rolling around the world because they loved the product. And so how do you cultivate those radical champions and mobilize them effectively? And so if you can thread the needle on those four things: product advantage, data advantage, distribution advantage, community advantage, you set the conditions to build something iconic. And after that, it's just execution at scale.
Yeah, a lot of things you said there really resonate. Like, for example, the go-to-market sales, the channel partners piece that you talked about, and I forget the exact figures, but every dollar, that goes through the channel exponentially more, there's like a whole kind of discussion around that. And then the data piece actually takes me to one of my last questions I was going to ask you is, I've been following you in the journey of the company for quite a while, and, AI is dominating the ecosystem right now in terms of investments, startups, the headlines, all those kind of things, right? But you guys kind of precede the hype around Gen AI, LLMs, agents, and so on. But that said, you are leaning into things like autonomous pen testing, AI hacking, as you've used the term. What are the competitive differentiators you think that are putting you ahead of, some of these companies who are just kind of jumping on the AI hype train, right? But they don't have the longstanding partnerships that you have across the channel, or they don't have the data advantage that you just talked about. Like, what are some of these competitive differentiators that you see help you, be positioned so well?
Yeah. So the first two are probably the most clearly differentiated, which is production safety at scale. I've got hospitals running pen tests against hospital production networks with patients connected to it right now. And you can't do that without earning the right to do so. And you earn the right to do so through blood, sweat, tears, and experience. And so we invested and the analogy I use is launching a model rocket is going to get pretty high. You can tape a GoPro to a balloon and get it to low Earth orbit. You could get a satellite to low Earth orbit. That's becoming easier and easier to solve, relatively speaking. But putting somebody on the moon is infinitely harder from an engineering standpoint. To write an AI script or a Kali Linux with an MCP server or whatever and compromise a bunch of hack the box domains or standalone pre-production web apps, pretty straightforward. Can be tricky, but it's getting easier every day. But to pen test a production hospital network, a production manufacturing network, a production financial services network across not just a small sample set of 100 hosts, but across 100,000 hosts, that is infinitely harder to go solve. No one else can do that in the world. No one is even close. In fact, the Expo guys just announced that they're giving up on production systems. They're only doing pre-production applications because it's the insanely hard problem to go off and solve. And that was the problem we focused on. There's a book called Getting to Plan B. It's a business book. And it's about when you're starting a company, pick the hardest problem to solve first, because those are your leaps of faith. And so we pick the hardest problem to solve first: internal production networks of critical businesses. And if we could solve that, everything becomes much easier.
Yeah, I can see the case. I've spent most of my career in the public sector, and the concept same applies, like what you just said there. If you can be trusted by highly regulated, sensitive environments that are very mission critical, your opportunity to go sell to the broader market is probably much more expansive at that point because you've earned that trust, as you just talked about. So, that runs me through my questions for you today, man. I always really appreciate the conversation. We've went through everything, technical AI, agents, LLMs, pen testing, autonomously, the business side of things. What should folks keep an eye out for from Horizon 3? Anything you want to kind of throw out there?
My big thing is, as I said, pen testing and SOAR are quickly converging into an integrated set of workflows around remediation. And the goal is to fix problems that matter. We're launching tons of capabilities that use our pen testing results to create a bias for action. Identify misconfigured EDRs. The next step is auto fix the EDR. Identify compromised credentials. The next step, auto fix those credentials, and so on and so forth. Everything's around shifting to a bias for action. And I think that's going to be incredibly exciting to see evolve in the industry. And as finding problems is alleviated, fixing problems is the bottleneck. Now, what are we doing to help accelerate remediation?
Yeah, I'm actually excited to see that kind of unfold and mature from folks at the forefront like your firm, because like I said, we've gotten great at finding problems, but we need to actually go about fixing them, or we're not mitigating any risk. And that's what we're here to do. So I'm excited to see that unfold. And again, thanks so much for coming on, Snehal. I always appreciate the conversation.
Likewise, man. Good to see you.
Take care.